Parliament has just made some major criticisms of India's foreign ministry. In its report looking into the Ministry of External Affairs, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs points out that India's diplomats are severely underfunded, besides also criticizing the fact that the Indian Foreign Service is just too small. Further, Parliament is arguing that the Ministry of External Affairs is too slow in delivering vital foreign aid projects in key nations. Let's go into some of these criticisms in detail. Criticism 1. India's diplomacy is severely underfunded. Parliamentarians looking into the MEA argue that the Foreign Ministry receives a pitifully small amount of the national budget. For example, in the 2023-24 budget, the Foreign Ministry's share of the national budget was just 0.4%. That's down from 0.44% in 2022 and 0.62% in 2019-2020. However, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has repeatedly called for an increase in the ministry's budget to at least 1% of the national budget. In the committee's words, keeping in view the magnitude and extent of India's diplomatic outreach and foreign policy objectives, the committee continued to feel that an allocation of at least 1% out of the overall budget of the Government of India to the ministry is reasonable and achievable. The committee hence desire that the ministry should strive to enhance its financial resources in line with its diplomatic responsibilities globally. In response to these comments, the Ministry of External Affairs pointed out that its budget allocation has increased from around 17,000 crores to a little over 18,000 crores this year. However, Parliament didn't buy that argument. It pointed out that 990 crores of that increase has come in because of funding for India's G20 presidency and not as part of an attempt to increase India's diplomatic capabilities. There's another problem. The Finance Ministry isn't meeting the MEA's budget demands. For example, in 2023, the Ministry of External Affairs asked for an increase in its budget to about 21,276 crores. However, the final amount granted was just 18,050 crores. As such, Parliament believes that India's Foreign Ministry doesn't have the resources it needs to promote the country's footprint globally. Criticism 2. India's Foreign Service is too small. India's Foreign Secretary Vinay Mohan Kwatra said that the Indian Foreign Service has around 1,011 diplomats. Unfortunately, that makes the service much smaller than those of comparable powers like China and Japan. Now, the Foreign Secretary has pointed out that the ministry is trying to increase the number of diplomats recruited from the annual UPSC exams from around 30 a year to around 50 a year. However, that just may not be enough. The committee feels that we have far too less number of IFSA officers than actually required to represent India's interests at headquarters and at our missions abroad, including various multilateral agencies. The committee are of the view that with the profound changes taking place in foreign policy from the Indian perspective, it is imperative that the cadre strength of the ministry be commensurate with India's expanding international stakes. Criticism 3. India's foreign ministry is too slow. Another one of Parliament's issues with the Ministry of External Affairs is its apparent inability to execute vital foreign development projects with key partner nations. Now, this needs a little bit of explaining. To begin with, Parliament is worried that India is underfunding development diplomacy in foreign countries. India's funding for development partnerships fell from 42.06% of the foreign ministry budget in 2021-2022 to around 32.4% this year. In view of the fact that our development assistance has been a major catalyst for the creation of much-needed infrastructure such as railway links, roads and bridges, waterways, border-related infrastructure, transmission lines, power generation, hydropower, etc. in partner countries, and the goodwill towards India, the committee recommends that the development partnerships with these countries needs to be reinforced with adequate budgetary provisions, especially in view of the increasing interest and influence of regional players like China in the neighborhood. However, the problem is compounded by the fact that key development projects have been delayed. While COVID-19 caused major implementation problems, delivery of projects was slow even in 2022-2023, when the pandemic was less of a factor. For example, Indian aid to Bhutan stands at 700 crores this year, despite having an annual budgeted amount of 2,200 crores. There is also a major underutilization of budgeted aid funds for Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, and other key partners. Even outside India's immediate neighborhood, diplomatic outreach has been hurt because of this inability to deliver key aid projects. For example, despite a budgetary allocation of 40 crores for development projects, Latin American countries received just a little over 1 crore. Meanwhile, China is pouring billions into these same strategic partners. The committee are aware that the execution of projects and utilization of funds have been impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, during 2020-2021 and 2021-2022. They, however, fail to understand as to why the pace of implementation of projects and utilization of funds has not picked up with the easing of the COVID-19 situation during 2022-2023. Taking all the above into consideration, the committee concludes that there are certain gaps in project implementation and monitoring, and desire that such gaps or loopholes should be identified and remedial measures taken to plug the same. With these three criticisms, Parliament hopes to push the Ministry of External Affairs to make the reforms it needs and prepare Indian diplomacy to match up to India's status as a rising global power.